be okay with like not having hope immediately available to you in the moment. Be okay to feel hopeless, to be lost, to be concerned, be open to possibilities that what might come. And that requires, I think, that level of comfort with uncertainty. If you're telling the students to take a moment of like mindful breathing and they're like, this is not for me, right? It's not gonna fly, it's gonna backfire, right? You're spending time to work with people to see like where are you actually at, what's getting in the way, but what do you want? Just keep going back to that to try and find out what's meaningful to somebody and to help them find that if they don't have that to begin with.
You say something that's pretty provocative, which is like the brain is not a computer.
Everything that the brain is doing is it interpreting our world, right, in the context of our values, like the embodied values that we need to sort of stay alive, the social values of our community and the people around us. What is the meaning of it all? It has access to so much more than the narrow confines of, say, like artificial computing device.
Research shows that kids who are coming from really challenging backgrounds and they come from a lot of trauma and stress, one adult can transform their life. They need one adult to believe in them. That's not going to come from a multiple choice test. Are you kidding me? No chance. So, Michael, I want to start with something personal because not only are you literally the most brilliant neuroscientist and psychiatrist that I know, but you're also my cousin. And, just 10 days ago, you came over to my house after one of the most excruciating experiences of our family's life, where I fell 44 feet rock climbing. And I remember just hugging you, both of us in tears. And there was something about that moment that was like, there's something bigger going on here that allowed us to be literally in this present moment. And, at Breathe for Change, we call that universal intelligence. And so I just would love to hear from your perspective what that moment was like for you and how that connects to, like, just what is that untangible form of intelligence really mean?
Yeah. Wow. Ilana, I'm so glad that you went right to the memory of which we were all together 10 days later, sort of connecting and like in sort of recovery mode and relief from everything that happened. Because my memory of that was the moment that Yen, your partner, texted me and let us know what had happened, and we just knew nothing. And beyond that, this was really potentially really serious, and wanted to do absolutely everything we could to be there to help you and your family. And so then to like for you to come through on this other side and space of that, like radically, like in a sense transformed. I mean, you've just got a few scratches to your hands, but everything else, I mean, it's been a major impact on you and just really fits everything that I think I know about you and love about you as my cousin. So this is really fun for us to be here to have this conversation, like, and in this time too, just really fits the moment, I think. Then your question, right? Like what is, let's just get right to what's intangible.
Just go there.
What is impossible for us to talk about, what's difficult for us to teach about, what's difficult for us to study as researchers and scientists. And I think that as I was reflecting on some of our conversations and preparing to like talk to you in some more depth about this, was thinking just, of course, you went through all the layers of intelligence in that experience, right? In a fall, your body responded in a way that you didn't have to like time to think and calculate and figure out what to do in that moment. And to be able to land in the way that you did, and to like not only to survive, but to just like fully come out intact is just amazing. And so there's one way that we could like kind of focus on that. And I think that's a big part of our conversation, and what we're interested in. But there's also this like this like the larger context in which this all happened. You're like you have like family and support and all of the and this your internal resources that brought you to be able to come into that moment so that it was not merely like the most it was threatening, but it was something that could enable the transformation
Mhm.
so that you were ready to receive it in
Mhm.
that way. So there's a lot, these events don't just like happen in isolation where we're intelligent in this moment. It's everything that was built up to that, and then everything after it, the way that it continues to carry you and work you,
Yeah,
that brings you to that kind of more, wow, what is my role in the universe type of questions that I think you mean by universal intelligence.
totally. So, you know, obviously, I'm an educator. I support and love educators more than anything in the world. And in the context of education, we often think about intelligence as like IQ or cognitive intelligence, like that thinking part of our brain. And, it shows up in the form of an overemphasis on test scores or, brain smart, so to speak. And so, at Breathe for Change and in our collaboration, we've been expanding that definition of what intelligence actually is to this broader human intelligence idea, right? It's not just cognitive intelligence. And in fact, I'd argue there's cognitive overload, like an overemphasis on that part. There's the somatic intelligence, the intelligence of the body. There's emotional intelligence and social intelligence, and what we just talked about, like the universal intelligence. So I want you to put on your neuroscientist hat and like, how would you describe these layers of human intelligence to, our educators and to really any human being who doesn't really have a concept for what that means?
Well, I just want to start by saying that, and you probably hear me say this a lot as we're talking, and you probably heard me say this over the course of our conversations, that I lead any kind of question like that asks me to like draw on like some sort of expertise that I'm bringing in, right? Is that I don't know, right? In the mind of the expert, like you kind of like you limit yourself in all those ways, right? But the trying to stay open to things. So
Mhm.
just kind of a little bit of like a preface, the way that I kind of come to a question like that, which is like drawing all of these like your expertise in all of this across all of these domains. Like wow, like me, I don't know the answer to that, but man, I'm so
You're
excited that
brilliant.
you're
I know
working,
you
so
are.
excited that you're thinking about it, right?
Mhm.
And so the thing that stands out to me, just like as a starting point for kind of a question like that, is like the word intelligence itself. Like,
Mm,
what does it come from, right? Etymology of intelligence, right, is our ability to read between the lines. Like
mhm,
literally, it's like to read between, to see, to
mm,
discern. Um, and so there's a real it that automatically sort of sets it up in such a way that it's not about like some sort of precise, specific, detailed um, item of knowledge or information or currency that you happen to know, but the
mm,
ability to put that into the context, to make it meaningful, to make it valued.
mhm.
Like the quest, like there's that classic saying or aphorism, intelligence. Intelligence is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, right? And wisdom is knowing not to put it
I used to think it
in
was
a
a
in a
vegetable.
fruit salad, right?
Yep.
That's
Mhm,
the wisdom, right? But then, like, I bet there's someone who could come up with, like, a really brilliant chef would come up with a creative way to put it in a fruit salad. And so it's like
mhm,
that kind of level of intelligence, right, which is really nuanced, specific, creative, coming to things that you didn't know how to solve this problem and you needed a new way to do it. I think that's what we mean colloquially when we're
mhm,
talking about intelligence.
mhm,
And it's not about somebody's ability to just recall an isolated fact in the moment. And I think that's a lot of the tension over the course of the education system. We all went through it, right? About how what is the measure of intelligence?
mhm.
Um, and interestingly enough, I think IQ. There's some parts of IQ tests that attempt to get at some of that, dimension, right, in terms of creativity and spatial reasoning and things. But we don't need to talk about that specifically. But
Well, I know that, like, you are obsessed with, like, the mind-body connection. You've committed your whole life to exploring, the body, the mind, the heart, how all of these different types of intelligences, so to speak, inform and connect to each other. And so I'm curious, Can you talk a little bit more about how you see these different forms of intelligence as like interrelated, interconnected, and how that impacts teaching and learning?
Yeah. So I tend to be kind of a lumper, not a splitter. So when people even um, oh, talk about cognitive intelligence, for example, I tend to just start to lump social intelligence into that, the cognitive aspects of that, and intelligence is emotional intelligence as well, right?
Mhm.
So we think about, I think it was Daniel Goleman,
Goldman.
yeah, right, kind of popularized emotional intelligence, and I think that's
Mhm.
when we first started getting outside of like a sort of strict definition. But people have been thinking about somatic and social intelligence for like a century, right? You go back to the early parts of the turn of the century, there were people who were thinking we need to also cultivate that aspect. And so intrinsic in that, of course, is the embodied kind of quest, the embodied phenomena that talked about with your fall, but also just our intuitive sense of how we navigate the world, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it's amazing and brilliant that our bodies can just find these buildings and navigate and we don't have to even think about that as we're doing it, but we
Mhm.
find our way, and the body picks up on all of the subtle cues to get us to where we need to be.
Mhm.
So I think that I've always been interested in the kind of mind-body connection, although there's a way that neuroscience kind of, uh, admittedly early in my kind of career, I was like, okay, well, it's all just happening in the brain. Let's just focus on that. That's the most interesting and complicated thing that exists. And then I had to kind of realize, oh, wait, there's a lot more than that.
Well, and you say something that's pretty provocative, which is like the brain is not a computer.
Yeah.
And I think, especially in the context of AI rapidly transforming our society and education as we know it, and will absolutely transform the future of education. Like, tell me more about your perspective and how it's shifted over time around like this idea that actually the brain is not a computer. So, what is that distinction between, you know, artificial intelligence and human intelligence, so to speak, as it relates to the brain?
Yeah, good question. It seemed like it'd be impossible for us to not get to artificial intelligence and AI in any of our conversation. And just to start with the analogy, the metaphor, kind of brain as a computer. I mean, we all use it, right? It's very natural to sort of be, oh, that didn't compute, right? Someone
Mhm.
talks to you that way, or even in my work as a psychiatrist, I'll talk to my patients, talk to the medical students that I'm teaching, and it's hard not to fall back on like your brain has the hardware, and then there's the software, and maybe your software is a little off today, and it's hard for us all to not kind of default to that.
Mhm.
And so I had a lot of help from teachers along the way to help me to sort of see a different perspective, which we could talk about on that. But just to stay with the main this question about the brain being a computer or not. Um, there's First of all, it's a biological system, right? And it
Mhm.
evolved in a particular way and develops in a particular way. So
Mhm.
it kind of unfolds, right? And over eons, right? And also as we're developing as individuals. And that sets up an embodied context from the very beginning, right?
Mhm.
So the everything that the brain is doing is it interpreting our world, right, in the context of our values, like the embodied values that we need to sort of stay alive, the social values of our community and the people around us,
Mhm.
and perhaps even universal values, right? What is the meaning of it all? And so that's where the hardware software thing really breaks down
Mm.
because it's wet. It's wetware. It's kind of mushy. It's goopy. If you've ever seen like a live brain, it's like doesn't look like a right.
Can't say that I have. I
No.
know you have so many times.
Yes, I have. So, but it relies on like blood and glucose and energy, right?
Mhm.
And all of those things shape the way that it processes information, if we can even say that's what it's doing, right?
Mhm.
It's actually it's determining what's significant about our world for us.
Mhm.
Um, and we have it because it's embodied, um, not only in us, but in the minds of all of the people that we live with, right? It has access to so much more
Mhm.
than the narrow confines of, say, like artificial computing device. So
Mhm.
That's part I mean, you could spend a whole course on this, so, there's
Of
in a little
course.
thumbnail.
Well, I wanna, like, double click on this idea of, like, somatic intelligence or body intelligence, because I know that you've spent a ton of time studying, like, the nervous system, our bodies, how also different somatic practices like meditation or mindful movement or breathing, like, actually impact our state, impact, our experience of the world, our reality, and of course, in the context of education, impact teaching and learning outcomes. And so and I know that you're a deep meditator yourself. I mean, I've never met anyone who actually has a consistent practice of getting on your mat 2 times a day for almost 2 hours total, meditating for decades, and that's you. And so that's not the typical route of a psychiatrist or a neuroscientist, at least from my experience. And so I would love for you to kind of talk a little more about your own embodied experience, like your own experience with these practices and how you think embedding and teaching these kinds of practices in the context of schools can impact our educational outcomes.
Um, well, um, thank you for trying to
I
frame it
mean,
as a
it's you're, like,
compliment,
literally my inspiration. I'm like,
but
"Let me
perhaps
try and meditate for, like, 1 minute. The kids are waking up, like, I got meetings, like, how do I fit it in?" And, like, you're just, like, on your mat every day.
what I was
It's
gonna say is,
incredible.
thank you for trying to frame it as a compliment, but perhaps I'm just that deeply troubled that I need to spend that much time in order
Oh,
to I mean, that's
I love
I think
you.
that's where it started, right? Was like, "Oh, I just wanna be able to, like, focus better and, like, sit
Mhm,
down on the mat," and when we even just say the word meditation, right? I think we're evoking, like it's like saying sports to somebody,
mhm.
right? What do you do? I don't know. Everything from ping pong to contact football. I mean, it's like so meditation is such a
To
broad
rock
it's
climbing.
such a rock climbing, yeah, it's such a broad term, and also brings with it, like, just this huge, like, terrain of contemplative histories, traditions, cultures, ways of knowing and understanding that, like, whew, all of that comes with it too, and
Mhm.
so it's hard to even try to condense this into, like, a nutshell of, I think, and I will at least try for you, right? To, like, get
Please
into that,
do.
like, to just be present with our not only our bodies, but also our awareness, right?
Mhm,
That which is aware of everything. And that to me is kind of like the ultimate context we were talking about, importance of, like, context
mhm,
and having developing some facility to be present with that,
mhm,
and to be just okay with being
mhm,
in that sort of field of awareness that is aware of my body, that is aware of my emotions, that
mhm.
is aware of, like, the fact that I have to go cook my kids breakfast in a little bit, right? And so there's a lot of those practices that you're just sitting there and it's just like sitting in, like, a volcano or something. It's hard to think of it as, like, relaxation or something that like that.
Mhm.
So it's transformative for me, I think, in that way, and ultimately aimed at sort of increasing my capacity to just be there in my life the way that I wanna be.
Mhm.
That's simply, I think.
I feel so lucky to reap the benefits of that, of your practice. And, at Breathe for Change, I teach strategies like the 2-word check-in, where, it's just take a moment, pause, notice how you feel, and
Mhm.
find 2 words that describe how you feel. Or like a practice that's just, taking a moment and notice the sensations that are arising in your body. And it's in that awareness that you're talking about that actually we can be like, huh, oh, I feel this way. What do I need right now? How can I respond differently
Yeah.
or in a way that's supportive? And that's so,
Yeah. Imagine if, like, my teachers were phenomenal, of course, and imagine if this was in, like, the cultural consciousness, like, 30 years ago, then that would
incredible.
happen spontaneously. I mean, I think that's part of, like, having a consistent practice where you have some time set aside
Mhm,
to just be, um, is in part so that then in the rest of your day and the rest of your life, it's spontaneously you can just be. And
mhm.
so, bringing that into, like, for educators, for teachers, for the students, I mean, I think is just gonna really radically transform our education system.
Totally. And we talk about the difference between like a responsive approach and a proactive approach to cultivating these types of practices.
Mm,
So like a responsive would be like you're in a heightened moment of stress, like the kids are about to take an exam and they're stressed out, or something really a tragedy showed up in the school, and it's like in that moment, how can you respond? And then it's like maybe you take a few deep breaths, or maybe you sit in a meditative moment, or maybe you need to energize or move your body. But then the proactive approach is like more of what you do in your practice. It's like, how are you consistently integrating these practices into your daily routine? I think you've nailed that one, but I'm curious, like, how do you think educators can start to think about more proactively integrating these moments for cultivating awareness in their classrooms and in their own lives personally? What do you think?
This is a really good question.
This is
I
all
don't
I think
know. I
about
don't
all the
know. Right, there
time.
you go. I don't know. I have no idea. But, I can't imagine something that would be more important to try to figure out. And also, like each person is gonna be so different, right? And I think that stepping back, motivation, right? Why do you wanna do this, right?
Mhm.
So when you have, if you're telling the students to take a moment of like mindful breathing and they're like, this is not for me, right? It's not gonna fly. It's gonna backfire, right? And so it's the same thing in my world and in mental health. We do a lot of things like motivational interviewing, right? You're spending time to work with people to see like where are you actually at?
Mhm.
What's getting in the way? But what do you want? What are your values? Try and just keep going back to that to try and find out what's meaningful to somebody and to help them find that if they don't have that to begin with. And then the habits can form naturally around that.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it feels forced, right? You
Totally.
just tell everybody right now, "Okay, well, everyone should do X 30 minutes every morning." It's a one size fits all. That's not a good approach.
Totally. And it's like, how do we offer them all these different options and give them the experience and invite them, right? We talk a lot about invitational language,
Mhm.
right? Because you can't mandate this stuff or it's not going to
Right,
work. It's going to backfire. It might
right.
cause harm.
Yeah.
But how do we teach them these practices that can enhance their well-being dramatically, which ultimately will improve their teaching if they're educators, learning if they're students, have them be more focused in school. And so I I just love the idea of, like, grounding it in what you just said, like, what do you care about and why? And how can you weave these pieces in from that place of knowing? And that's your universal intelligence, right? The connection to something greater than yourself, your passion, your purpose, like the greater meaning that is our life, here on this planet. And so it's like it's a beautiful way
Yeah.
to connect that form of intelligence in to the learning space.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of framing it too. I think that, there could be a tendency like universal intelligence, like, what are you referencing? Like, is that a religious thing? Is that like
Mhm.
I mean, is it literally a cosmic thing? I mean, maybe it is, right? I don't know, right? There's these theories that the universe is like sort of self-learning itself, like the laws of physics, right? I know nothing about this, right? But you hear things like that, right? And has you rethink the nature of evolution and the way our whole not only our biological systems have evolved, our lives have evolved, but the whole cosmos, right? Um, but this question of universal intelligence, why I like the way you're framing it is because of this creative sense of something that's pulling you outside of your own kind of narrow focus about your own immediate needs and survivals, which
Mhm.
is like such a unique human phenomena, right? We're talking about human intelligence. So what is it about those things that we do that we bring ourselves into like beautiful places and we like
Mhm.
to create and we make art and we do all of these things um, that are deeply motivating for us, but don't seem to have any like intrinsic, it necessarily seem to have any intrinsic extrinsic purpose. Like, what's the function of that, right?
Mhm.
For a sort of cognitive intelligence structure, it feels like it's divorced from that.
Talk more about that because I know, like, that you've found such meaning in your work as a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist, and in art, in music, like, weaving these pieces in that are often, like, pushed out. Like, they aren't important or they aren't considered relevant in education, right? It's like math, science, all that, all the
Exactly.
stuff, right? So talk more about how these artistic forms of intelligence, so to speak, like, why do they matter? What's the impact on our bodies, on our minds, on our hearts, on learning?
Wow. Yeah. There's so much there. I mean, my immediate mind goes to kind of the I think as we're talking, like, I keep getting transported back to, like, my own, like, schooling experience and imagining, like,
Yeah.
what that would be, what that was like, um, and when I was first learning math, I mean, I had the benefit of my father as a mathematician, and so he
Mhm.
had this big stack of, like, math textbooks, which none of which I would ever really actually read except for one because it had pretty pictures, right?
Oh, yeah.
So and that was the book on chaos and fractals. And
Uh-huh.
so, if you've ever seen these, like, the butterfly effect pictures, they look like these big swirly kind of diagrams, strange attractors. They
Yeah.
create these really beautiful images or fractal images. They're just absolutely magnificent, right? And so it's like, wow, is that math or is that art? Like, what is that? How do I go like learn that in my math class? And then I find out, well, you're gonna have to do a lot to get to that point to actually understand the math that kind of helps to generate those figures. So I'm not sure I ever really quite made it in that way. But so for me, that was always really deeply motivating to sort of understand that. I mean, that was just kind of a calling for me, perhaps in some way, that I was
Mhm.
trying to work on figuring out.
Mhm.
And so then it comes to like the question of like art and math and or art and music and these other dimensions that are not part of the traditional curriculum. And what does research in neuroscience tell us about that? And um, so, I mean, my research doesn't like literally focus on like music or art or the sciences or what's now called like neuroaesthetics, which is
Mhm.
a whole area in of itself, and I think is super fascinating. Um, which is the kind of question that is, what is your brain on art? You know what I mean? We show you some picture. We show you Van Gogh. You're in the brain scanner. This is the part of your brain that lights up. Or you listen to music, and then we show you something else that's really boring. What's the difference, right?
Mhm.
And then also for outcomes and research and these sorts of things, both in a mental health context and a teaching context, all of that is really cool. And then there's this other side to it. And
What is it?
that's kind of what I'm really interested in. I don't know. It's sort of it's emerging, right? So this is kind of newer stuff, which is to like take the tools of art and
Uh-huh.
of music to bring those people into the science from the beginning. So you're not trying to study the science. You're using the artist, their way of thinking, their way of being. You're using their intelligence to inform the way we should study the brain, the way we might
Huh.
actually even just interpret, like, brain activity. What would that mean? And,
Interesting.
I mean, I think at first, yeah, interesting, right? You're like, what could that actually look like? What does that mean, right?
Like, what does it teach us? What are you finding?
Yeah, so, I mean, in my own kind of, like, little research world, I collaborate with, as many musicians and, narrative studies folks as I can, so I have a literature studies, like, expert that I work with because we think a lot about, um, uh, expectation, like,
Mm, mhm.
right? So the brain is kind of this, like, organ that does a lot of predicting of the world, like, how do we
Uh-huh.
predict things, but it's also about like what do we expect. And art and writing and stories, it's all about kind of shaping our expectation and then getting some fulfillment about that. And we go through these cycles of like expectation, is that right? Did I draw that quite right? Was that sentence quite right? Is that touching the meaning for me in some way? And so then we just sort of say, okay, like what is the brain doing that looks like that process? What process
Mhm.
in the brain might look like that? What is we can start to like literally look at the shaping of like the electrical activity of the brain to see like, okay,
So cool.
what's happening around that kind of a process? It's like a way of understanding it and thinking about it as like almost like a musical instrument or something like that.
You're totally bringing me back to a moment a couple months ago when you and Judy and Yen and I were at dinner, and I was telling you that I'm doing this webinar on human intelligence, and here's the framework, and I showed it to you, and then there was one slide that I wasn't going to present on. My co-founder Michael was about brain-heart coherence, and I like vaguely knew what that was, and I was like, whatever, Michael's going to present it, so you know he can know more about it. And then you're like, brain heart coherence. Come on over to my house and I'll show you what that is. And you hooked me up. I don't remember. You put a clip on my ear, maybe on my hand with a computer. And then you asked me, like, what brings you joy when you think about Aaliyah and Zoe, my kids? And I started talking and I could see like the lines go like this. And then you're like, okay, now let's just have a conversation. We talked about something kind of stressful, and then it went down. And then you guided me through a loving kindness meditation, and all of a sudden, it was like I saw the brain-heart coherence or whatever it was that you were studying on me scientifically go up. And then you did some gratitude practice, and it went up even more. And all of a sudden, it like brought complete tears to my eyes. Like I was in awe, total awe. Because it was like what I've been teaching and what I've been like I believe so strongly is important to integrate into our educators' lives, into our students' lives. You were leading it for me, and I saw this scientific, like impact right in front of me, like the in the moment impact of these practices. And I was like, oh my gosh. So can you just share a little bit more about like paint the picture of what I saw? Like what's the science that's happening when we're
Yeah.
engaging in these like gratitude practices, loving kindness meditation, when we're focusing on joy, when we're cultivating the types of ways of being that we actually want to live
Yeah.
our lives, every day in.
I appreciate and I
Do you
really
remember
yeah,
that?
I do, and I
I
appreciate
was like,
your
Michael, we have to collaborate. This is
yeah, that
insane.
was like an aha moment
I
for
was an
for the
aha
2 of us,
moment.
right? It was
Yeah.
and to be able to I mean, that's sort of why I got called to science in some ways that I do, I think as we've been talking, there's maybe you can hear what I value in terms of like the science and qualitative understanding, but
Which as
also
a qualitative researcher, oof, I love.
yeah, but then I
Yeah.
also love the data and
Yeah, of
the
course.
quantitative aspect of kind of what we're working
I'll
with.
leave the numbers to you.
And so, of course, ironically enough, right, that's the heart math
Yeah.
device, which basically enables you to it measures your pulse, but it looks at coherence within your pulse. And so, basically, how consistent is your cycles of heart rate as it goes up and as it goes down? Because our heart rate sort of naturally goes up and goes down as we breathe in. We naturally increase our heart rate as we breathe out. It naturally slows down. And so that's called, it's called cardiopulmonary or, it's actually heart breathing coherence, actually,
So
isn't a
cool.
sense what it's but technically measuring. But part of that is because it has a feedback loop to our brain so it's like heart breathing and heart, brain, and breath all together, sort of
Uh-huh.
integrated as a
Heart,
current.
emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
brain, cognitive, and what was the last one you said? Breath,
Breath,
somatic.
somatic, yes. Of course, tend to just put them all together
Of
because I think
course.
I think the brain is also the seat of emotional intelligence as much as
Mhm.
it is like cognitive. That's why it's heart brain coherence. Like
Yep.
they work together, right? So they get that. And what you were saying was basically your degree of like cardiorespiratory or breathing, heart, kind of how synchronized that is. And one of the things that these are the original researchers who worked in heart math, what they worked on this project, we're studying the autonomic nervous system, right?
Mhm.
So that's the body's sort of like an automatic control system,
Mhm.
or the brain's automatic and nervous system's control system from the brain all the way down through the body. And of course, it touches all of our our internal organs, our heart, our lungs, and our gut.
You love
Um,
the gut.
yeah, I do love the gut. Don't leave out the gut.
Don't leave out the gut.
Gut
I've heard that from you so many
intuitions.
times.
Yeah, for sure. And so then that system is sort of classically known as like the fight or flight.
Mhm.
Everyone knows that's like your sympathetic nervous system, and then your rest and digest is the parasympathetic
Mhm.
nervous system, and that's kind of what helps you calm down. And so part of what you're seeing as you're doing that breathing is a way of basically increasing your vagal or parasympathetic tone.
Mhm.
And you can directly see that on those measurements.
So cool.
And there's a way that, it's that feedback is really helpful. That's sort of why they develop it. And I think there's also, and this is sort of something I thought would be interesting for us to touch on, right? Is that there's coherence, and that's clearly important, right? But we're not always it's not always going to be that way,
Right.
right?
It's definitely not always gonna be that
And
way.
so we're in an era where everybody's got wearables, and anyone can go out and measure their heart rate variability, and oh boy, my heart rate variability is too high or too low or something to this effect. And I found that it's helpful to introduce it in the way that I introduced it to you,
Mhm.
especially in my work with my patients, because it gives them a way of seeing that.
Mhm.
And then there's that kind of next step of saying, okay, and when does that happen? Why does that happen? And kind of stepping away from needing to see the screen to do it, so to
Yeah.
speak. And also to be okay with to sort of not overemphasize that you always need to be in this coherent state. We're always going to be a little bit out of alignment and disagreement. And that kind of falling out and coming back in again is part of, I think, a really important part of human intelligence that doesn't get emphasized enough, right? It's not about us just all coming together in coherence. It's about our ability to slightly get out, and then we can see how we come
Come
back
on
in.
back,
Because
yeah.
when you make those little mistakes or whatever it is, then sometimes accidentally you find something really cool,
Mhm.
right? And another thing that artificial intelligence doesn't have purchase on.
I've heard you in so many conversations that we've had use the word dynamic
Uh,
a lot. Can you talk a little bit more about how, when you think about human intelligence and all these different, layers that we're talking about, the somatic, the body, the feels, the emotions,
yeah,
the cognitive, the mind, the thoughts, the
yeah.
the universal, something greater than ourselves, and the social, the interactions between us, between groups of people, between communities. Talk more about the dynamic piece of it all.
Oh boy.
I know I've heard you geek out on it, and I love it.
Dynamics is good. I mean, part of it is a little bit of a response to the way we're taught it
Mhm.
initially in a basic biology class or medical school, right? We talk about homeostasis, the body sort of
Mhm.
staying in this regulatory set point. Um, and it's a dynamic. It's more of a homeodynamic process because it's constantly readjusting. And that's one of the insights from heart rate variability research, but also just the way that the brain works is it's just highly, highly variable and dynamic and constantly updating and changing its way of interpreting the world. So that's why it doesn't fit very well to model it as an algorithm.
Mhm.
I mean, we were talking about the brain and computation. It's not to say we shouldn't use computers to try to understand it or to even simulate all of these things because they can help us make sense of the dynamics. But
Mhm.
it's not the same thing.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, if you're not in a dynamic state, you're probably not alive, right?
Mhm.
And I think we mean that both literally and metaphorically, right? You want to be in the classroom with a teacher who's dynamic and engaging, right? So
Mhm.
what does that mean for someone to be dynamic and engaging, and how is that interfacing with your kind of nervous system, so to speak? So I think that's a really interesting question. I don't know, how would you measure that to begin with? How would you, study that
Right.
dynamic in that more metaphorical sense is an interesting one.
Totally. And, you know, you just mentioned the nervous system. We've talked a little bit about the nervous system, and I think that is one of the aspects of my experience over the last 10 years at Breathe for Change, learning about the nature of the nervous system. like the parasympathetic state, then the sympathetic state. You touched on it, but I want to know more.
Mhm.
So I'm an educator. I don't know much about the nervous system. How can me understanding the nervous system, what my body does, and how it moves in and out of these states, how can me understanding that help me be a better teacher
Yeah.
and help me teach my students these skills that will help them regulate their nervous systems in a more supportive way for their learning?
Yeah.
So geek us out on the
Well,
on
that's
the
a
nervous
really
system.
there's a really important preface, I think, for this, right? Which goes
Great.
back to the way we're using neuroscience, and we have a tendency to like kind of overweight on that,
Uh-huh.
perhaps, like as a society, and really value that. So I think there's this philosopher, he calls it, I think it's like neuromania, right? It's like, this is the thing that will make your brain do X and will make you happy and healthy and whatever because
Mm.
it made your brain light up in this particular way. And I mean, maybe, but there's a lot of research that might say the opposite, right? And so um, I think to the extent that your teacher is coming in and is finding that it's transforming their ability to understand their own experience and helping them transform their understanding of their own students' experience and the way we were talking about the way the body handles stress and
Mhm.
threat and challenges differently and how that physiology works, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Um, but then
So give it to
but
us.
then there's a way that would be, like, concerning if you were to kinda overweight, like, to sort
Mhm.
well, let me just say something about that, right? Like, there's some research in psychiatry where when patients come and get or just society at large gets the neuroscientific explanation for why they have depression or anxiety or PTSD, they get the neuroscientific explanation, there's, like, some evidence that looks like maybe it alleviates stigma a bit for some people.
Mm.
Everybody's a little bit different.
Mhm.
But, like, there's also some research that suggests that as a society as a whole, we move away from people. We're, like, more concerned. We think they're less
Mm.
likely to get better because they have, like, a nervous system problem. They're not just depressed, right? They got something wrong with their brain. So,
Mhm.
there's a risk of
Mm.
bringing that in too strongly.
Mhm.
And so that's part of
It
why
can create stigma.
yeah, because that
Yeah.
in itself creates a different type of stigma,
Yeah.
and it's also dynamic and changing, and who knows what the next generation will think. I mean, a lot of people have embraced, like, neuroatypical as a way of talking about themselves, and that has really changed the way we think about it, talk
Totally.
about the nervous system in really great ways. So, like, that's an evolving, area, and I just wanna, like, emphasize that, and that's partly why I really like to try and find the right language to talk about what the brain is doing,
Mhm.
um, as opposed to talking about it as a computer,
Mhm.
to think about it as like a creative instrument or a creative organ. I mean, its job is literally like the outer layer of our brain, kind of cortex, is constantly rewiring itself. Like it doesn't matter. You don't have to be in learning mode or not. That's just like what it does by definition, and it's constantly generating new
Is that what you would call
possibilities.
neuroplasticity?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
neuroplasticity, right? And so that to me, that might help your like teachers and your kind of like to get into that, right? To think about it as this very creative organ that works with the body in the autonomic nervous system and how do we kind of balance all of those processes together. That I'm optimistic about, but it's also about finding the right language and working with the teachers to find that and to not sort of come in and look to the neuroscientist for, like, evidence on, like, how to do the right type of teaching, like, I'm not sure that that's the right way to go.
Mhm. Talk to me about, like, so just to contextualize this, in classrooms all over the US, we're seeing mental health crises on the rise, right? Our students are experiencing more mental health challenges than ever before. Our educators are more stressed and burnt out, and we're seeing teacher shortages. And so there's so much stress that's showing up in classrooms.
Yeah.
And so w- how what's going on in our bodies, right, when we're experiencing that stress, and how might we address that more productively in
Yeah,
schools?
yeah.
And just yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Really good question about that. I mean, and the issue of the rates and what's driving all of that aside, and to also, well, not putting it aside, actually bringing it in here and sort of saying, yeah, like there's cultural, societal, institutional level things that we also have to think about.
Mhm.
Um, and knowing the way that that affects our body, right? So stress, one of the things that really was a game changer for me as a researcher when I first came to UCSF was actually meeting Wendy Mendez, who has done a lot of work in stress and autonomic nervous system, and
Amazing.
she does a lot of work in what's called the biopsychosocial model of threat and challenge, and regarding stress, and I always thought, well, of course, stress is not like this like monolithic thing. You're just stressed, but the way we make sense of that stress, the way the body, right, and cognitively, emotionally, socially, the way that we appraise that stress, that's what they call
Mhm.
it, appraisal. They try and make sense of it, has a very different physiology, not just in terms of like the nervous system, that would make sense, but in terms of like the cardiovascular system.
Hmm.
So like your heart rate goes up when you're stressed, but when you're under threat, then your blood vessels kind of tense up, right? It's because imagine that tiger is going to bite your arm off. You're going to close off those blood vessels. You want to make sure that you don't bleed out of your arm, right? So
Mhm.
the threat is a very somatic preserving kind of response. But then there's the kind of challenge stress where like you just need to charge up that hill with your
Let's
friend.
go.
Let's go for it, right? You don't want to reduce the blood flow to your muscles as you're trying to
Hmm.
go up the mountain with your friend, right? And so that's considered like a challenge sort of stressor. Your heart rate still goes up, but the physiology is really different. It has adverse like physical effects, right? In terms of like
Mhm.
blood pressure, high blood pressure, things like that, and other kind of systemic processes in the body. So that really has really stood with me,
Huh.
especially as we've entered an era where we're really thinking about like someone from one background or a different background or different experience, they might find the classroom threatening in some way, right?
Mhm.
And to be attuned to that, um, and to do so in a really kind of really nuanced way that addresses like the tendency for us to be like, well, we don't want to, we need to be everything needs to be safe, right?
Totally.
And so to try to balance out those things, right?
You're making me think about, like, how one experience that might be stressful, let's just say there's an exam.
Hmm.
Some educator is given an exam to their students, and you might approach that as like a challenge, you just said.
No,
Like,
actually, you're freaking me out right now. You immediately went
fine,
back to like
you're
third
you're
grade,
you're
third grade
you're you
classroom,
approach
like
it as a threat.
standardized test.
You
I
approach
was
it as a
threat.
threat.
Yeah,
So, that test is feels like a total threat. So then you're, like, closing off, and your body is, like, constricting, so to speak, and that's obviously, from my perspective as, as an educator and a researcher in that field, that's it has a negative impact on learning.
yeah,
How can you effectively perform on a test if your body is literally not in a state to be able to focus and approach that test from like a positive perspective? And I think like mindset is an interesting thing to think about. Like
yeah.
you've got that itty bitty shitty committee inside your head being like, you're gonna suck on that test. Like you can't do that. Whereas I was like you. So I'm just gonna pretend that I was a challenge. But like if
Got it.
I am coming to the test, I'm like, I'm gonna crush that test. I'm still experiencing stress, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah,
But it's like more from this place of like, ooh, let me crush that challenge.
yeah,
And so
exactly.
it's like we could be experiencing the exact same context, the stressor,
Hmm.
but from a completely different with a completely different somatic and emotional experience.
Exactly.
And then what I'm starting to see surfacing that I think is most interesting about this for educators and just the education system in general is that how our students are experiencing their learning and the teaching, whether it's through that lens of challenge or threat, will radically change their educational and academic outcomes.
Yeah.
So then I'm like, what can we actually do? And I want to turn this back to you. What can we do to help uh, students, show up to some of these stressors that arise in their life from in that more challenging realm versus the threatening realm so that they can have more effective outcomes and enhanced well-being. Because that's the connection I'm making, at least.
Yeah. You put me in test taking mode,
Okay,
and
great.
now
Let's
I
bring
haven't
it because
lost it,
our
but
education system is
uh,
way too focused on.
yeah, the high stakes testing with
Yeah.
that language makes a lot of sense to describe it for children. And I went back to like I remember coming out of like a standardized test in tears, in like third
Mhm.
grade or something, because like I was like, I'm not going to get into whatever program it was to be special, right? A kid got to be special, right?
Says the most genius
And
person that
so
I
I was
know.
like, I did like, it felt like I had done a terrible job, and my like principal was there, and she was like, she gave me this big hug, and I was like, oh, like that, knowing that was there was really meaningful for me, and like kind of probably helped me get out of some of that. But I've always had difficulty with tests. Um, but this is hard. I mean, what you're talking about is one of the perennial challenges in education. I know nothing. This is like, it's not my world. So you get to figure this out, right? Which is like what's happening in the home, what's happening in society, what's happening in the culture that set things up in this
Mhm.
particular way. So that for this particular individual, but then also that's not their destiny, right? That like you hope that there's that teacher, that person, that principal that I had that like can show you another way,
Mhm.
and do what we can. But I don't have any magic sauce on solving that
Well, I
issue.
think
But
that
yeah,
what you just said is the magic sauce.
yeah.
Like, I fundamentally believe that what you just said is the magic sauce. Like, in my dissertation, my favorite line in the 300-page document was, "We have to prioritize the whole, WHOLE,
Hmm.
in every educator and student instead of just the holes that students fill out and with their standardized or with their number 2 pencils on standardized tests."
Yeah.
And I think that relational aspect that you just spoke to, like eh, a student, I think research shows that especially with kids who are coming from really challenging
Yeah.
backgrounds who, whether it's abuse or poverty or you name it, and they come from a lot of trauma and stress, like one adult can transform their life.
Hmm.
They need one adult to believe in them.
Yeah.
And that's not gonna come from a multiple choice test. Are you kidding me? No chance. It's like, how can education become more about like building relationships, fostering human connection, allowing our students to connect more deeply to their purpose and their passion? And so that like all the scientific things that you study, like the brain heart coherence and these other beautiful things that you've described in this podcast, like the outcomes, like your body and your emotions, you're gonna and your brain, it's gonna demonstrate that you're doing well, you're
Yeah.
thriving. And
Yeah.
so that's like why,
No, it's beautiful
coming
what
back
you're
to
saying.
human intelligence, it's
Hmm.
like all of these things matter. It's not just the cognitive piece.
Yeah. 100%.
So I guess I want to leave our educators with your final words of wisdom and something hopeful. They're the most amazing people in the world, right? Doing the most important work of raising our kids, literally your and my kids. And what's kind of the message you want to leave them with?
It's hard for me not, like we were just talking about Parker Palmer, I believe,
Oh,
and just the
my
kind,
greatest role model.
to follow like the kind of tried things of like following your heart and the courage to teach all of those things. Like the educators, like there's all those messages are already there for them. They don't need a neuroscientific expert to come in and tell them that, those things. Um, what I would say is to kind of, especially around this question of like hope, is to be okay with like not having hope immediately available to you in the moment. Like to be okay to feel hopeless, right? Or to
Mhm.
be lost, to be concerned, right? To be in this space in this sort of mental health. When I'm doing work in teaching my medical students and residents, we talk a lot about something called negative capability,
Mm,
which is the ability to rest in mysteries, uncertainties, and doubt
mm,
without irritably reaching after fact or reason. That's not my quote. That's Keats. Goes back. Goes back at least 100 years. So a poet coming in, right, giving us the insight. That's the kind of that, like, maybe I'm just a glass half empty person a little bit because I'm always like, okay, let's be willing to be with what's half empty right now, but to do so in a way that's like, not just like dismissive, but
Mhm.
to be open to possibilities that what might come, and that requires, I think, that level of comfort with uncertainty, and in that way that I think that's part of a human intelligence thing, right? It's a sort of human wisdom thing that we're able to be like, I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Mhm.
That's the biggest wisdom I got from my mentors, and I'm just passing that through the teachers that taught me. Like,
I just love that so much because I feel like at least when I'm thinking about my own life, the the moments that have been the most transformative, this being one of them, and I'm still in process of
yeah.
digesting it all, but have been the most challenging moments of my life. And it's like through the process of sitting in that challenge, grappling with it, processing it, and then some way, shape, or form overcoming it, so to speak. It's like that's where the learning happens.
Mhm.
And so I love that you gave our educators permission to to be in the hopelessness
Mhm.
because there's so many challenges impacting
Right.
our kids, us, our system, and I think it's through being in the hopelessness that hope can become more present.
Right. You can't have the
'Cause you
light without the dark here, right? There's no way
exactly.
that works. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This was so incredible to engage in this conversation. I know we could go on for hours and hours,
Yeah, I'm
and
sure.
we will. But
Thank
I
you so
so
much, Alana.
appreciate you just sharing your wisdom and your experience and your heart. It's so clear how much you care about the work that you do, and it inspires me deeply. And I
Yeah.
feel so grateful.
Can't wait to hang out again soon.
Yeah, love you.
Love you too.